Good afternoon and welcome to our next session, which has been a regular feature of GLOBSEC over the years. Now or never, unlocking the European future for the Western Balkans. And I would like to now to the stage before I introduce them. So I'd like to begin with Milo Djukanovic, the president of Montenegro, somebody who will be a very familiar face to many of you here today and tuning in online. President Djukanovic has been involved in Montenegrin politics since the 1980s, first became prime minister in 1991, has celebrated a few jubilees of his own over the years. You might say he's the queen of the Balkans, as it were. We also have Dimitar Kovachevski, who's the Prime Minister of North Macedonia, with us. We have Arbin Kurti, the Prime Minister of Kosovo. Miroslav Lajčák, who's a very familiar face for our Slovak friends here, the former Foreign Minister of Slovakia, who is now the EU Special Representative for the Belgrade-Pristina dialogue and other Western Balkan regional issues. We also have Sir Stuart Peach, who is Special Envoy to the Western Balkans of the United Kingdom. And I am Matthew Karnichnig, the Chief Europe Correspondent for Politico. Just a couple of housekeeping points. Everyone has a headset, or should do, on their seat. I suggest that you turn that on now. President Djukanovic will be speaking in Montenegrin, and the English translation will be on channel 2. And again, if anybody would like to ask questions, you can do so via the app, or we will have a live question and answer session at the end. But Ambassador Lajčák, I'd like to begin with you to get sort of a regional view from your perspective now in Brussels. As I said before, this is something that we have discussed almost at every GLOBSEC. When are the Western Balkans actually going to have a real perspective of joining the EU? And we really haven't moved much further along that road. What we hear a lot of, as we heard a couple of weeks ago when you were in Berlin with Prime Minister Kurti, as well as with President Vučić, who's not here today but was here yesterday, are statements like this from Chancellor Olaf Scholz in Germany, who said, "It is in the interest of the region and the EU that the 6 Western Balkan countries have a perspective of becoming full EU member states." And yet, it just seems those hopes are constantly being dashed. And I want to ask you, why hasn't the EU, because this is the perception in the region, why hasn't the EU lived up to its promises?
Yes, you are right that the Western Balkans has been on the agenda of GLOBSEC for, I think, every year, and we have repeated more or less the same messages, but right now the situation is different. Yes, the developments in the last 5 more years have not been very positive. There was a decreased commitment from the European Union towards the Western Balkans, lack of enthusiasm, maybe even absence of a consensus when it comes to full membership of the region. And at the same time, there was a wrong perception that the region can wait. The region is in the safe place already, and there is nothing bad that can happen to the region. So that's why we don't have to be in a hurry. We can fix our problems first and then deal with the region. Now, this has changed because the European Union is losing popularity and credibility in the region dramatically, and I can tell you that it's more and more difficult to sit in the panels like this in the region to represent the European Union, because when years back we were sort of lecturing, now we are being criticized by our partners. But the dramatic game changer is the Russia's war against Ukraine, because this has changed everything. And with all the tragedies, it is also a bit of good news for the Western Balkans, because the war in Ukraine, Russia's aggression in Ukraine, made the process of enlargement political again. Everybody understands this is not a technical exercise. It's not about clusters and ticking boxes, but it's really about alignment. It's about this region being part of us, sharing our values, and speaking the same voice. There is also an understanding that we do not have the luxury to leave the region in the limbo between two realities. They need to end up as full members of the European Union. So there is a feeling of urgency. There is a lots of goodwill. Now the question is whether we will be able to turn this goodwill into a new reality, new quality. So the goodwill is there, but we are still struggling. We are also struggling, to be very honest with you, how to demonstrate our willingness to bring Ukraine closer, but to do it not to the detriment of our Western Balkans partners who have been part of this process for many years, and we shall get the answers on the 23rd of this month. And what I would like to encourage our partners from the region is to help the European Union to make the right decision.
Well, I would like to bring in Prime Minister Kovachevski on this, because you have sort of felt the brunt of the false promises from Brussels over the years, sir. You know, I think you have the longest candidate status of any country other than Turkey. What do you feel now when you look at the discussion about the Ukraine, and what is your sort of sense of what this will mean for your own country's EU perspective?
Well, thank you for the question. It is a very valid question, especially when you take it from a perspective of a country which has 17 years of candidate status. And I will put it from the perspective of North Macedonia, and then in light of the other countries which you mentioned. So the EU accession was supposed to be a merit-based process, where a country should embed the European Union values as very important: democracy, economic prosperity, and social justice. In our case, 45% of the legislation is already harmonized. And if you compare the country with other countries which are already negotiating for quite a years, then on different chapters we are doing quite better. And if you take the five last reports of the European Commission about the progress of the country, then they are all fully positive. The problem is that a merit-based process has become a typical political process, where due to the decision-making process of the European Union, one country can block the accession of a candidate country, which happens in the case of North Macedonia, and this to be done based on a pure political basis and reasons. On the other side, we have a new geopolitical momentum, and absolutely a picture in Europe where EU, as Miroslav said, has to decide on the way how to keep its credibility and its relevance in the Western Balkans region. Because if it is a merit-based system, and it is practically stated like this by all the relevant representatives of the European Union, then it has to be merit-based for all the countries. I am aware that, and we are all aware that there has to be a clear vision also for Ukraine, for Georgia, for Moldova, because these countries and the citizens of the countries want to have a democratic society. They want to choose their future as a economic prosperous states with social justice for all the citizens and the freedom of critical thinking, which are values of the European Union. And normally that this has to be supported by everyone. And we showed as a country and as a region our support to the Ukrainian people and to the Ukrainian government. But on the other side, now the European Union has two problems on the table. One is the decisions about the Western Balkans, where if there is no decision, the credibility goes down, the relevance goes down, and at the moment when they go down, the nationalism grows up, which is especially imminent for the Western Balkans region, and we do not want to have that. On the other side, the process for Moldova, Georgia, Ukraine will be probably a different process, which practically we can see from statements of the presidency of the European Union and some other representatives of EU institutions, as a process for countries which still do not have the capacity and capability to start, let's say, a fully fledged negotiation or accession process. So the key decision now is to start and to send a message, a clear message, with a bold decision for the Western Balkan countries on the way forward after June. This is what I would have to say.
But coming to you, President Djukanovic, your country is seen by many as being further along this road towards EU accession as well. You also in Montenegro have felt the brunt of Russian intervention. Do you see now, after Ukraine, more willingness by the EU to push this process forward, or are you just hearing more of the same of what you've been told over the past years?
Well, objectively speaking, Montenegro is the forerunner and is most advanced in the negotiations with the European Union. And I think it's closest to closing negotiation chapters, and that when European Union decides to accept new members, Montenegro could be among the first ones to be admitted into the European Union. That's a fact. But this should not blur our view from the key problem. And the key problem is what Mr. Lajčák mentioned. It is so obvious that European Union had a lack of enthusiasm and the lack of dedication to its own enlargement policy and integration of the Western Balkans in the last 5 or 6 years. And this logically resulted in the lack of reform enthusiasm in the governments and societies of the countries of the Western Balkans. So unfortunately, we found ourselves in the situation where we have a balance of the lack of powerlessness, and we accuse European Union, they accuse Western Balkans, and the only ones who profited were the third parties. So those third parties expectedly took the geopolitical empty space, because you can't have any vacuum in geopolitics. But the problem is that the third parties entered that space with expressly anti-European platform. Western Balkans is not a primary goal of Russian destruction. The primary target for Russian destruction is European system of values and European security, and that is attacked from every part of European continent. Western Balkan is a very good soil for that, because in the Western Balkans we still have weak states, and in the Western Balkans Russia always counts on the pro-Russian sentiments that Russia can manipulate with, successfully achieving its goals. And the goal is to stop those countries on their path towards European Union and Euro-Atlantic Alliance. As a result of the lack of attention from the European Union, I think that in the end we got the aggression of Russia against Ukraine. Because you are right, we had warnings in the Western Balkans. In 2016, Russia attempted a coup in Montenegro with the same goal, to stop Montenegro from joining NATO. They did not succeed at that time. Montenegro is a member of NATO, but the Russian hybrid warfare continued in the Western Balkans. Today, Russia is only using much more brutal range of instruments in Ukraine, but they have the same goal. Russia wants to stop Ukraine from becoming a member of NATO and European Union. You registered well that the reflection of that was new unity and new determination and new efficiency of European Union. It was a response, and that is something that is encouraging. And we were all happy to hear and see that European Union showed stronger robustness to protect its own system of values and its security, and showed us that it really has more serious intentions to get a better position on the geopolitical level. I think it's very important now to keep European Union on that course. I think that Prime Minister Kovachevski said the right thing. For us in the Western Balkans, there is something that we desperately need. We need a unique one-voice message from the European Union. Not a new message, but the original message of the European Union. The European Union used to say this message, but they forgot about it. And the message is, every country of the Western Balkans has its place in the European Union. And every country can take its place when it reaches the standards and implements the reforms properly. So, European Union has to continue with the regatta policy, encouraging competitiveness in the Western Balkans, so that we all can become full-fledged members of the European Union according to the same rules. I have to admit that something that we can hear in the last 10 days actually leads us to the idea that we have to be very concerned. It reminds us of former practice of the European Union, and it actually leads us to the conclusion that we might go back very soon to the situation where we have various and different messages from various addresses to the Western Balkans. We hope that it will not happen. We think that it is very important not to discourage further the Euro enthusiasm in the Western Balkans. You should not encourage opposition to the European part of the Western Balkans, because it was encouraged a lot in the years where we had a lack of engagement of the European Union. Now we have hesitations in the Western Balkans when it comes to its European future. The Western Balkans now needs a clear message, and I said what the message should be. But if we keep seeing various, diverse messages and ideas that one country will become a full member, one country will be an associate member, one will have a gradual membership, etc., etc., I think it will only contribute to the confusion in the Western Balkans, and it will be the path for the Western Balkans just to remain distrustful towards its European future and very fruitful soil for various influences that are anti-European.
Thank you for that, sir. I think one of the things we hear often in Brussels is that a real stumbling block to pushing forward is the situation between Kosovo and Serbia. Prime Minister Kurti, you were in Berlin last month with President Vučić and with Ambassador Lajčák. You met with Olaf Scholz as well. Nothing really seems to have come from that meeting or from the previous meetings that you've had. If Kosovo and Serbia can't even agree on license plates, how is there going to be any hope in the foreseeable future of coming up with a more fundamental agreement between the two countries?
Thank you very much for the invitation and for this opportunity. In process of talks with Serbia under auspices of Brussels, I've been committed, constructive and creative. We need a dialogue which will be a principled one between two equal parties for a legally binding agreement for full normalization of relations with Serbia centered on mutual recognition. Unfortunately, Serbia is saying that they will never recognize us, and in addition, they do not acknowledge crimes committed in the past. So, to be honest, this second offends and hurts us much more than the first. 23 years ago, we had NATO intervention in Kosovo and in former Yugoslavia to stop Serbia's genocide. 19 countries of NATO, 19 democratic countries, got together to bomb one country in Europe. It must have been very bad. They all had oppositions in their yards, but they got together to stop genocide of Milosevic's regime in Kosovo. And I see here the core of the problem: denial of the crimes of the past, of war crimes, crimes against humanity and genocide. However, we are trying hard in Brussels, together with Mr. Lajčák, to achieve agreements when it comes to car plates, with the principle of reciprocity, regarding electricity in the north, because energy is not being paid there by Serbs because of illegal structures of Serbia, not because of Serbian citizens. And also regarding enforced disappearances during the war, because we have still over 1,600 missing persons. However, Kosovo is a successful story of people's liberation struggle and hard work on one hand, and the aid of EU and US. We are very thankful for the democratic West, for the support throughout these years. We declared independence in 2008, 9 years after liberation. We got ICJ advisory opinion that declaration of independence did not violate international law. In 2012, 10 years ago, supervision of our independence has been lifted. 25 countries back then from democratic West decided that supervised independence of Kosovo must become full independence, and we cannot now go back in the past. We have to move forward. We believe that EU is our destiny. Europe is our continent. We have had an impressive growth last year, 10.53%. First time since the end of the war, we had a double-digit growth. FDI increased by 22%. Tax revenues by 34% without changing fiscal policy, because when people are hopeful, they rather spend than save. Plus, when they see that there is no corruption in the government, they are more ready to pay taxes. Exports increased by 83%. We came out as first in World Justice Project regarding rule of law in the Balkans. We rose by 17 places to World Press Freedom, according to Reporters Without Borders, and then again by 17 places, Transparency International Corruption Perception Index. So Kosovo is a successful story of combining economic development with qualitative democracy. And we look forward now from positive answer from Council of Europe. We have applied to become members. We have condemned from the very first day Russian aggression and invasion in Ukraine. And we have received 4 Ukrainian journalists who are now being sheltered in Kosovo and became residents of our capital town, Pristina. We need help from EU, and we consider that European Union is the most important historical process and political project of peace and prosperity since the Second World War, which we all have to strengthen and defend.
So one thing in your position that I think has caught people's notice is that you oppose membership in the Open Balkan initiative that has been spearheaded by Edi Rama in Albania, of course, and President Vučić. Why is that? Why do you think that this idea of a borderless Balkan region would be a bad idea for Kosovo now?
Western Balkan 6 is open towards EU and NATO and US and UK. I don't think that we should get open for some northeast or south superpower, east superpowers. So we're fine. And we rely very much on Berlin Process 2.0 now, with a new, fresh kickstart by Chancellor Scholz. We support regional initiatives with EU values inside and with EU mechanism to help us, not outside of EU. And I must say that neither as political orientation nor as cultural sensitivity, I do not belong to those leaders who believe in Balkan self-sufficiency. We belong to Europe, and we should become members of EU as soon as possible. When we won elections for the first time, and when it was obvious that negotiations will not be open for Albania and North Macedonia, it was then in October 2019 when President of Serbia engaged in this initiative. I believe exploiting frustration of Albania and North Macedonia, and we know very well that Serbia is having much better relations nowadays with Russian Federation and China than with EU and US.
Well, as many of us have heard, there's also discussion in Montenegro about joining the Open Balkan Initiative. President Djokovic, your Prime Minister is going to Serbia next week to discuss this with President Vučić. What is your view? You've been a bit more skeptical about this idea. Is this something that you think could actually happen?
You are right. In Montenegro, which is the society that strives to be a democratic society, there are different opinions about numerous issues, including this issue as well. The good thing is that there is no difference between the government and the President and the Parliament about the strategic goal that we have. All of us wish Montenegro, as soon as possible, becoming a member of the European Union. We all recognize that on the path of dynamic reforms, Berlin process is helpful. Berlin process is a regional initiative launched in Berlin, as its name says, but it is a process that offers a really broad framework that includes a common regional market as well. And the framework of cooperation that really is based on European standards. But today when I listen to the protagonist of the Open Balkan Initiative, and I listened a couple of days ago the statement of the President of Serbia, I heard him say that they have excellent cooperation between Serbia, Northern Macedonia and Albania, but we have a problem when we come to the border with Croatia or the border with the European Union. So that's the problem. Open Balkans is not based on European values. Open Balkans is based on a good initiative for regional cooperation, but instead of cooperation on any standards or based on any standards, and cooperation based on European standards that is underlined by the Berlin process, it's logical that we will choose Berlin process. That's why we have a mistrust towards the Open Balkans and what its purpose is. Why should we just double the initiatives? Instead of that, we should focus and use the capacity of the initiative, regional initiative like the Berlin process, which was already started years ago. My opinion is that the Open Balkans was started as an initiative when some countries and their leaders were resignated by the lack of effectiveness of the enlargement policy. So when they realized that the prospects for their countries in the European Union was uncertain, they started developing a parallel initiative that should serve as a kind of backup for the countries of the Western Balkans, which in their opinion would not have European prospects. That is something that I do not agree with. That's our fundamental difference. I believe that we are entitled to European prospects and to membership in the European Union, and we have to participate and should participate in all regional initiatives that improve our capacities and our cooperation so that in the near future we can take our seat in the European Union.
Well, speaking of which, I want to ask a related question. You, as I said before, are the longest-serving political leader in the region. Do you think that you will be president when and if Montenegro joins the European Union eventually? You have a presidential election coming up, I believe, in about 18 months. Will you run again?
Well, those are long-term forecasts. If our friends from China could hear us, they would make a joke because, you know, long term for them has to be measured in centuries. But I'm talking from the point of view of the Balkans. This time that you ask for is a long-term perspective. So, at this moment, I do not think about my personal future. I mean, whether it will be in politics or in some other field. But what is important, and what I can tell you with certainty, is that on a daily basis, I keep working with the government on the efforts to de-block the negotiation process and to get the report that we actually met the interim benchmarks for the chapters 23 and 24, which is the field of rule of law, that it is registered in the annual progress report of the European Commission in October, and that in the Intergovernmental Conference in December this year, Montenegro can close several negotiation chapters and keep a good pace of progress towards the European Union and its position as a forerunner or leader in that process. My belief is that in a serious work of the government that I expect them to do, we should not be working on the negotiation chapters after 24. I mean, I believe that in 24, at a certain moment, Montenegro will be able to say we are ready on the internal level, and then expect the opinion of the European Union. Who is going to be in which position is less important, but I can with certainty say that I have been infected with this politics to that extent that it's not important where I will be and what I will be doing. I mean, I'm sure in one thing, that I will, in my full capacity, from any position, contribute and help Montenegro to reach its goal as soon as possible.
Okay, well, I will take that as a yes, you are going to run again. Sir Stuart, I'd like to come to you, another longtime watcher of the region, and I think something that is obvious today and in all of these discussions is that one country sort of looms large over this whole issue. This country is not represented here today, so we can say whatever we want. And that is, of course, Serbia, which has recently agreed to pipe in more Russian gas, has refused to join European Union sanctions against Russia, is also very close, increasingly close with China. I mean, this is a strange question to ask someone maybe whose country just left the European Union, but do you think that it is possible for other countries in the Union, in the Western Balkans rather, to join the EU without Serbia being part of the mix somehow?
Well, thank you for this opportunity. And of course, as Miroslav said at the beginning of this session, the war in our continent, started illegally by Russia, changes everything. And if we are to build resilience in a divided world, we have to work together. And I would also echo the thought on European values. And that's my answer to the question on Serbia. It's about values, and it's about doing the right thing in this situation on our continent. And of course, we can't predict in the context of GLOBSEC what will happen next year, but we can see the pattern. And the other country we haven't mentioned here is Bosnia and Herzegovina, where we can see many risks, which, let's be honest, are long-term, as well as exacerbated, made worse by the war that Russia has started. And so the British government has decided to focus on this region. We're offering more projects, because the third risk I can see, which I think affects all the countries here represented by their leadership, is the fact that for the people of the region, energy security is now a real issue. So for all those reasons, with the war and with the situation and the need to align around values, surely now is the time to work for that Euro-Atlantic future, including our friendship and our friends from the United States. And that means cooperating on everything through energy, infrastructure, transport, making life easier, better for the people that the leaders here represent, and the friends that I represent and the United States represents to the region, and have demonstrated that friendship for decades. And so, of course, it's easy to find all the things that divide, all the things that make things difficult, and there's a lot of The problems in the region are not new, let's be honest. But I think now, because of the situation in 2022, it's a wake-up call for cooperation on values, and the UK government continues to support the Euro-Atlantic journey for the whole region, all countries, and we will work with each of the leaderships and all the governments to try and achieve that. And it's not about our membership of the European Union. We're still in Europe as a continent, and we still continue to offer support through our programs and through our embassies across this region. But further division, I think, is dangerous because, as we see, with when you started your question, I thought you were going to talk about Russia. Because Russia has in-place resources, ladies and gentlemen, to make the journey we're talking about harder. And they will use those resources in the situation we're in. Therefore, we need to work together and find a way to achieve better unity.
But Ambassador Lajcek, to come to you on this, I mean, isn't this exactly what Russia wants, that there is more division? There's this fear hanging in the air that, well, if Europe and the United States and the international community doesn't engage more in the Western Balkans, then they're going to gravitate towards Russia, they're going to gravitate towards China. They've already made inroads there. But engagement, you've been in this role for a couple of years now. There have been no shortage of initiatives over the years. Might it not be better to just ignore them for a while and let them work out their differences themselves? We were talking about the license plates before. I mean, you know, they can't solve that problem alone. Why do we need all of these special envoys and representatives and what have you?
Well, of course, this is what Russia wants, but we should not care about what Russia wants. We should care about what we want. And the question is, do we know what we want? Do we want what we say we want? I am not sure that this was the case for the last 5 or 10 years. And as a consequence, the region is less prepared for the membership in the European Union today than it was 5 years ago. Because it looks like we want the region to meet European standards before they will be allowed to start accession negotiations, which is absurd. Because they should meet the standards through the process of accession. We are conditioning things which should be automatic. Opening chapters, starting accession negotiations, and then through a credible process which we own 100%, we will decide about the speed. Actually, they will decide about the speed by their performance, by the reforms. We have politicized, the decision about now you get a candidate status, like North Macedonia 17 years ago. You can give a lecture how is it to be a candidate. Then we make a decision about starting accession negotiations. Then it takes another 2 years to actually start the accession negotiation. You know, this is a joke. This is not a process. So that's why we really need to be very serious. Give our partners the chance to prove how committed they are through the process of accession negotiations. And it's naive to think that you will meet European standards without a credible European perspective. So this is what, sometimes it seems that we are afraid of the process that we conceived and we fully own and fully control. And therefore we should be less obsessed with what Russia wants or what China wants. Geopolitically, after the war in Ukraine, or the Russia's aggression in Ukraine, it will be a different geopolitical situation, a different world. If we want Europe to be a credible player, we need to have Western Balkans as part of the European Union. If we want to see ourselves still dealing with the Western Balkans, instead of really being a relevant player, then we will be out of this new game. And whether we need all these envoys, to be very honest, international community has been part of the problem as much as it has been part of the solution. We have done too much of political engineering and social engineering in the Balkans as well. We really need to keep it simple. It's one process, it's called enlargement. It has its clear rules, it's based on performance, on merits of the countries. Let's go back to basis and let's give the process a chance.
Right, and I do want to come to questions from the audience in a second, but this is exactly what I'm getting at. You're trying not to do what Russia and China want, but in the process it appears that you are creating conditions, or the EU is, that actually meet their ultimate goals. And I'm wondering, what do the likes of High Representative Borrell or Commission President von der Leyen say when confronted with these realities? What is the view in Brussels about this? Because everybody knows outside what's going on here.
2 points. First of all, Russia and China are logically using the space that we left open for them. But we have the capacity to fill the space. So if we decide to not to do it, then of course we cannot be surprised that other actors enter, and we should not be concerned with them doing so. Second, the atmosphere in Brussels has changed significantly. As I said, 2 years ago, there was still this feeling of complacency. The region can wait, we don't need to hurry. Now everybody understands the region cannot wait, we need to hurry up. There is a lot of commitment. There are EU Western Balkan summits every year. There are events when they are being invited. We will have another summit on the 23rd of June, EU Western Balkans.
Well, this is what I mean. There's no shortage of summits. They just seem to go nowhere.
The problem is how to turn this new momentum and this new will into new quality. And here we are still struggling, unfortunately.
I would like to open up to questions. Is there anyone who has? There's a young woman here in the front row. If we could get a microphone.
Thank you. I'm Eugenia. I'm native Albanian, and it's a pleasure and honor for me to be here. I represent the Youth Atlantic Treaty Association, and my question is more or less to all gentlemen in the panel. We all know that the process of enlargement has been fatigued, exhausted, and a lot of the public opinion, at least in Albania, has fallen down, and there is not much the trust and the belief that this integration process will come to an end soon. But my question is, as far as this relation is a two-way relationship between the European Union and the countries, what went wrong from the European Union part, not from these countries who are candidates? And is it time that the one-fits-all collective approach must come to an end and shift to a more tailored and specific approach to all different countries? Thank you very much.
I don't know who wants to take that question. Any volunteers? Prime Minister, the floor is yours.
Yeah. So this is a very valid question. So it is true that as soon as a process takes too long time, then the confidence in the process itself is falling down. And the credibility of the process is going down, and the relevance of the players inside the process is going down. So you exactly explained, as you in your question, practically the answer. So where the problem is? It's in the way of the approach. So whether you want to make a bold and swift decision to finish a certain process, or you just want to work around the process without a goal to finish it. So what has happened? A merit-based process, at least in our country, and I said for our country, and I said this at the beginning, a merit-based process on which all the resources are actually directed to work on, has become a typical political process. On the other side, there is no alternative. Because if you take the status of the economies in the Western Balkans, and by the way, at least one thing has been achieved, and this is that we were talking, and Miroslav knows about the Balkan and the Balkan Peninsula, and all of a sudden it became the Western Balkans, so where there is a West, there is a East. So we are talking about certain division, which I never liked, to be honest. And this is at least some of the non-positive achievements in this whole process of years and years of accession. And as soon as we have economies which 80%, and most of them are like this, foreign exchanges with countries of the European Union. 80% of the foreign direct investments are coming from the countries of the European Union. Most of the citizens of the countries from the Western Balkans which go abroad live and work in countries of the European Union. Then there is no other alternative. When we talk about no other alternative, we are talking about European values, and we are talking about the European fundamental four freedoms: the free trade of goods, services, capital, and movement of people. And when we talked about the Open Balkan is exactly practical implementation of the four freedoms. So it's a platform how to implement the four freedoms, because it is unusual and it is unprecedented that a goods produced in Elbasan would travel slower to North Macedonia and to Serbia than to Norway, and this was the case. This was the case. It is unprecedented that the only borders are on the Western Balkans, because as soon as you go to Horgoš, to the Croatian borders, you don't have borders anymore up to Scandinavia. And that's what we are talking about. We are talking about practical implementation in the Open Balkans of the four freedoms. Why is it not going to be allowed for the people which are on a markets of 2 million, 4 million, 8 million to work on a market of 12 million? Why not? What's the problem in that?
Okay.
Why they not to have a higher GDP growth rates? See the GDP growth rates on annual basis in the last 30 years. It's not more than 2 to 2.5%.
Well, there are certainly many proponents of the Open Balkan idea.
It's a practical
For those of us
implementation
who've
of the
driven
four
across the
freedoms.
region, it would make our lives much easier as well. President Djukanovic, you wanted to pipe in there, and then I would like to get another couple of questions, please.
Well, we should remind here of something. The process of enlargement is an administrative and technical process, but it is also a political and geopolitical issue. It seems to me that Europe in the last years had a lack of attention towards the Western Balkans because it underestimated the political dimension and completely neglected the geopolitical dimension of that process. As a result of that, we have what we now have in the Western Balkans, a deep confusion with serious penetration of anti-European interests that we will have to deal with even after the war in Ukraine stops. I mean, eventually the war in Ukraine will end. But the Russian hybrid warfare in the Western Balkans that lasted at least 6 years left certain consequences. And if we want to make Western Balkan an organic part of European Union, that is the question that, or these are the consequences that we will have to deal in the years after the Ukrainian war. I just want to extend a warning here one more time. Frequently, European circles talk about Western Balkans or its European future like it is only a Balkan issue, but I think it is par excellence European issue. If Europe leaves in the Western Balkans or in any other pocket of Europe an empty space, a vacuum that Miroslav mentioned, space for anti-European policies to be active, that will make Europe less competitive. We may not forget, I think that we are faced with a new geopolitical organization. It is clear that Putin will not achieve his goal to bring us back to the times of the Cold War. But it is clear that this model of geopolitics that was built after the Cold War has shown serious deficiencies, and that now we are facing a new geopolitical architecture being made. And we would like to know primarily where Europe will be in that new geopolitical architecture, because we are European. So if we don't understand that Europe will lose competitiveness if it is not united, if it is not stable, if it does not use all its resources, then we have a problem. So I think that the key problem is political problem. Because according to the messages that you can hear from different European addresses, you understand that in various places in Europe, they don't have the same view of the importance of unification of Europe.
Thank you, sir. I would like to go back to the audience, the young gentleman in the first row there. Mr.
Thank
Nitsch.
you, Matt, young gentleman. Milan Nitsch, German Council of Foreign Relations, originally from Slovakia. If you allow me, I have two related questions in the logic that President Djukanovic just described. What you said before is that you expect from the European Council on the 20th Council meeting with the Western Balkan leaders on the 23rd of June is a clear message, clear way forward. Now, in between, in 2 weeks, the European Commission will publish its own opinion on the candidate status of Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia. Will you, President Djukanovic, and other two Balkan leaders come out in favor of, if that's a positive avi, of granting a candidate status to those who will get a positive opinion from the Commission? And the second question, let's dream about GLOBSEC in 1 year. Now, in a few minutes, we will have presidents of Georgia and Moldova in a different panel, in a different room. Do you think if they will get a candidate status, there will be time to have a joint platforms between the Balkan and Eastern countries with the EU? For instance, the GLOBSEC. Thank you.
I think that's for you, Mr. President. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Dakle, ja mislim da treba podržati
I think
status
that we should
zemlje
definitely
kandidata
support the status of a candidate country for Ukraine, definitely.
jer status kandidata
Candidate status
primarno počiva na
primarily is based
političkom
on political
aspektu.
aspect.
I ja mislim da
And
Evropa,
I think that Europe,
razmišljajući geopolitički
thinking
o
in
svojim
geopolitical
konkurentima,
sense
koji su
about its
neki,
competitors,
kao što vidimo, vrlo
some of
agresivni,
whom are, as we can see, very
treba da pošalje
aggressive,
jasnu poruku
should send
da
a
je
clear
su
message
Ukrajina
that
i druge zemlje
Ukraine
koje
and
to
other
žele
countries who want
poželjni
are desired
kandidati
as
za
candidates
članstvo u
for membership in the European
Dakle,
Union.
tada počinje proces. To je
So
ono
that's
što
when the
moramo da
process
naglasimo. U tom procesu
starts. We have to
Crna Gora već
emphasize
10
this.
godina.
And
Mi smo
Montenegro has been in this
2012.
process for 10 years
počeli
already.
pregovore sa
In
Evropskom unijom.
2012, we started negotiations with the
Protiv
European
sam
Union.
toga da
And
se
I am against
kreiraju prečice za članstvo.
any shortcuts for membership.
Kada je Evropska unija
When
jednom
European
navratu
Union
kreirala prečicu za članstvo, mislim
created
da nije
once
pogodila
a
cilj. Ni
shortcut
ona,
for
ni zemlje
membership,
za koje
I think they
je ta
didn't
prečica bila kreirana.
achieve the
Ja
goal.
mislim da treba
Neither European Union nor the
dati
countries
status
who got the
kandidata, a
shortcut.
nakon toga
I
nastaviti
think
sa
that
istrajnim
Ukraine should be given a status
na
of a
reformama
candidate,
koje
and then
treba
after
da
that we should
dovedu do
continue,
usvajanja
or European Union
standarda
should continue
na
insisting
bazi
on
kojih će
reforms
konkretno
that should
zemlja
lead the
postati
country to achieve the standards on the basis of which the country can become a member. That's my question related to Ukraine, but does anybody want to answer the other question related to Georgia and GLOBSEC and the combination of
Ambassador
countries?
Lajcek, would you like to answer? Sorry.
Well, I can only repeat that, I mean, it's written in the treaties that the country, that every country that shares the European values has the right to apply for membership, and then it's the process that shows whether the country meets the standards and the norms. So we should not politicize what is technical, and we should not make technical what is clearly political. So exactly as President Djukanovic said, everybody should get the chance and should prove through the credible process, merit-based process, whether it meets the standards and the criteria.
I do want to take a couple more questions, but I just wanted to ask you quickly, Sir Stuart, you said before that Russia obviously has changed the entire dynamic here. What, though, do you think would happen if Russia loses the war, which I think most of the people in this room hope will happen? What would that mean for the Western Balkans? A Ukrainian victory?
Well, it means they can live up to the European values, and of course, in that scenario you paint, there'd have to be a peace process, and then the whole of Europe could work together, as we're trying to do in the answer to these questions. And I think that is the goal. It seems distant today, sitting here in Bratislava. Of course it does, but we have to think that way.
But in terms of Russian influence over the region, what do you think it would mean?
Well, all of the sovereign countries in the region understand their own degrees of influence. I mean, the British government is very grateful to those that are supporting sanctions, as indeed we all should be, and we continue to look at ways of making Russian activity more visible. And again, we encourage all like-minded, values-based sovereign states to do the same. I think for too long, if I may, for too long, Russia has been allowed to do things in this region and elsewhere in Europe without consequence.
Do you think, a related question to you, Ambassador Lajcek, we're running out of time, but just maybe a quick answer. Will European troops remain in Bosnia after November? This is something a lot of people are wondering.
Will what? Sorry.
Will European troops remain in Bosnia after
I hope
November?
so. I hope so. They have been doing a great job, and they have always been supported and appreciated by everyone, all constituent people and the entire citizenship of Bosnia and Herzegovina. So this should not be a problem. This should not be a question. It has been made a problem right now, but I really hope we will solve this problem before November.
Okay. I think we have time for one or two more questions here in the second row. The gentleman. There's a microphone coming to you there. Yeah.
Hello, Matthew Rhodes from the George C. Marshall Center. Stuart Peach mentioned cooperation also with the United States in addressing challenges within the Western Balkans region. I'd be interested from each of the panelists being as specific as possible. What would you like to see the United States doing or not doing to contribute to addressing challenges in the region?
Maybe we could start this one with Prime Minister Kurti and then come to Prime Minister Kovachevski.
I think some of the consequences that we have today are due to the favoring of political stability over democratic reforms. We need rule of law, anti-corruption, we need social justice, we need dealing and facing with the past. We need reciprocity of minority rights. We need equality. And in this way, EU will be homegrown in all the 6 countries of Western Balkans.
But the question was about Washington and the United States, and hasn't Washington sent mixed signals throughout this process in recent years? If you think of the Washington Agreement, I think, which just expired last November, where you agreed not to seek international recognition, and Serbia also agreed not to block you. That's run out. That didn't go anywhere. The initiatives during the Trump presidency didn't really go anywhere, and I think some people on the panel might argue that they were counterproductive.
Well, we had previous administration which was seeking a quick fix, a snap deal, and didn't turn out that well. But what I'm emphasizing is not to favor political stability over democratic reforms. And US and EU can both cooperate to this end. Concretely, I believe that rule of law, fighting organized crime which is cross-border, there is such thing as Balkan Mafia, and we should all cooperate, and we need the help of EU and US to fight it, and we need countries with democracy where opposition can win. I was in opposition for many years and I won the elections. Next time, someone else might win the elections. We need to have EU values helped by EU itself, but they must be homegrown. And to this end, I think that also EU has a lot to do in strengthening continental welfare state, because social justice is important, anti-fascism, because there has been appeasement with different proto-fascist forces in EU, and we need NATO in 21st century, not less than in 20th century.
Thank you very much. We have 2 minutes left. Prime Minister Kovachevski, I want to give you the last word on this question, which is also central to the region. Is the EU cooperating well with the United States? Is this partnership working, or is it just creating more problems?
This war in Ukraine with the attack of Russia has showed a clear unity between the European Union, between the countries which share European values and which have implemented full democracy within themselves, together with the United States. And this can be clearly seen through the alignment of the NATO alliance with the European Union alliance. And also in the case of my country, we have, even that we are not members of the European Union, we have fully aligned our foreign policy with the foreign policy of the European Union, because the decision is whether you are on the right side of history and whether you are on the side of democracy in war with autocracy. United States have been the strategic partner of the region and of North Macedonia within the 30 years of our independence in any field of the development of the country, because let's not forget that the countries of former Yugoslavia are countries of discontinuity because of the change of the political system, change of the economic system, change of the country itself, because it was practically coming new countries out of a federation. And also there were the Yugoslavian wars, which were again discontinuity. In this process of rebuilding, of regaining trust in the region, United States have played a very valuable and significant role. And to prove this even more, even this week, the delegation of North Macedonia in the fields of foreign affairs, security, defense, culture, and economy is in Washington on a level of ministers in a strategic dialogue with the United States, out of which there will be concrete activities which will be worked on.
I'm afraid we're going to have to end it with that very diplomatic answer from the Prime Minister on the role of the United States and the EU in the region. Seems we could use maybe a bit more of that diplomacy in some of the other discussions. Thank you very much to the gentlemen on the panel. It was very interesting for me at least, and I hope for the audience. I would also like to let you know that the next session begins straight away. It will be led by Steve Clemens and begins with this short film. Thank you.